going on, everybody? Welcome into another off-season edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Pod. Nick Whalen, Joe Bartel, hanging out with you. You see it on your screen right there. Check out RotoWire.com, 15% off any of our subscription products. Just put in that code. It's a new one now, YouTube 15. Put that in at sign up, 15% off any of our subscription products. We're also brought to you by Circa. The ultimate fantasy football draft can only take place in one city. That city is Las Vegas. Circa Resort and Casino wants to bring your whole league to Vegas with the ultimate fantasy football experience giveaway. The winner brings your 12-person league for a 2-night stay at Circa Resort, and you get to have your draft at a cabana down at Stadium Swim. Plus, you're getting limo transportation to and from the airport, a welcome party at the Legacy Club, a booth at the world's largest sportsbook, and more. There is no better place, take it from Joe and I, no better place to draft than Circa. 21 and up, go to circalasvegas.com. That's circalasvegas.com for more information. All right, Joe. Excited to do this one, man. But when we have months and months until the NFL season, yeah, right. I'm still in NBA mode until NFL season starts. I think we're like almost exactly 100 days away, by the way, from the opener. So we're getting there. But it allows us some latitude here to do some concept episodes, to dig in on some topics that we ordinarily wouldn't hit as we get closer to draft season. And the theme for this week's episode, Joe, regression candidates, players who are unlikely to hit the benchmarks that they hit in 2024. So I have a list, you have a list, maybe we'll have some crossover between those two lists. But in terms of putting your list together, the methodology, what did you look at? What type of players did you find yourself gravitating toward?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. I'm Mr. Negative. So this is right up my alley. I looked at the ESPN standard scoring, who are the top leaders, and I said, oh yeah, that person's definitely not doing this. Or more realistically, it's like, all right, the ESPN final score at the end of the season, where was their rank in terms of position? And that was kind of how I picked my list. Now, I want to be clear, there are probably people towards the end, I'm not even sure if we'll get to those 8, that I'm not necessarily of the opinion they will regress, but it's more likely than somebody else. And I think the free space for this, and I guess I'll be very curious. I feel very confident saying this, knowing your opinion. The free space for this whole podcast has to be James Cook, right? Like we could have labeled this James Cook plus 7 other people who will clearly regress. The problem is everybody in the entire fantasy community also believes this. 16 rushing touchdowns for James Cook last year. I think 18 total touchdowns. You had 8 total, both rushing and receiving in his previous 2 years combined. You have the Josh Allen factor. The Bills added Josh Palmer, which I think will make the offense. I mean, not that Josh Palmer's a world beater by any means, or Keon Coleman's going to improve. Like all these things are going to materialize in the fact that I think James Cook is going to absolutely be a regression candidate. My question to you, Nick, was, does it even count? Like, should we spend time on this? Because there's going to be literally probably dozens and dozens of hours dedicated to the fantasy community overall saying, don't draft James Cook, don't trade for James Cook, that I felt like it wasn't fair to include him on this list.
I also didn't include him on my list because I had a feeling that you would bring him up. I had James Cook on a lot of teams last year, Joe, and I don't know that I will be diving back in. Probably about as obvious as it gets in terms of regression. A guy who had exactly 6 touchdowns, rushing and receiving in 2023, and then jumped up to 18 a year ago. I mean, is it entirely touchdown based though? Because it's not like James Cook, had a gaudy yardage total. Like he actually rushed for more. He rushed for more yards in 23 than he did in 24. And part of that was he played 17 games. Everybody sat out week 18 this last year. But do you just look at that as quote unquote touchdown luck? Because I still think the Buffalo Bills are going to be a very productive offense.
Yeah, the yard per carry was up last season compared to the year before. So what you're referencing was 6 touchdowns. It was 4.7, whereas it's 4.9 this past season. He was more efficient running. That makes sense to me too. He was more involved as a pass catcher, although not dramatically. It's completely based off touchdown regression. But the problem I have is what you mentioned before. The year prior, 6 total touchdowns, 16 touchdowns rushing this past season. There has to be somewhere in between. We know touchdown regressions are already like a very, very understood and well comprehended stat as it is, which is to say it happens very frequently, even as a passing quarterback, for example. The difference of 35 touchdowns, 25 touchdowns is not that crazy in a given football season. And from a rushing perspective, even more drawn out. James Cook isn't this bludgeoning running back either. I think if you'd had to look, most of those 16 rushing touchdowns, at least half have to come from outside 10 yards. I mean, like if you have Josh Allen you would theoretically use him in that way. The big news today when we were recording this podcast is the tush push was not banned, as like what Deanna Rossini seemed to think was going to happen early in the past 24 hours or so. Josh Allen would stand to benefit at least somewhat from this as well, too, if the rule stays the same for one more season. I think Ray Davis also gets more involved, too. Now, I'm going to say Ray Davis is a better player than James Cook, but just overall, the idea of somebody having 16 total rushing touchdowns does not happen very often. He is the free space in my mind in the who is going to regress this season. It's James Cook all the way.
So I'm looking, of his 16 rushing touchdowns last year, Joe, 11 of those came between 7 yards and 1 yard. So we're talking deep in the red zone. He had a 49-yard touchdown in week 2. There's an 11-yard touchdown against the Tennessee Titans mixed in there. 65, 41, 46. What do you think dries up first? Is it the short yardage, or is it these burst plays that we saw from James Cook?
The short yardage. And again, I don't want to say it's because James Cook is bad at doing them. Clearly, he did it last season. He's effective. Ray Davis can do that. Josh Allen can do that. There are things offensively. Keon Coleman is more of a red zone threat that will also take that up too. And there are some players that are just uniquely good at being red zone threats. I think of Aaron Jones, for example. You wouldn't think of his diminutive size, but he actually is really good in the red zone, has really been his entire career. Either we have now seen something that will be more of the norm, or the 2 previous years for James Cook are more representative of what will happen in the red zone. So I would say there's 4 or 5 different reasons as to why James Cook will not get 70% of those touchdowns within the 10 yards. I mean, that just seems to be very, very unlikely in my mind.
I do recall a few scenarios because of my rooting interest in James Cook last year, where it was such an obvious Josh Allen spot, and I was shocked that they gave the ball to James Cook. So you do wonder if some of those instances come around, and just being in that position, even if we think Buffalo is going to be elite offensively, which I do again this year. I mean, you're right. If you're just playing the numbers, like how many guys have had back-to-back 16 rushing touchdown seasons? Not very many. Let's stick with the Bills real quickly here. First of all, Captain Spock chiming in the comments. He says he agrees with you. Cook is a touchdown regression candidate, and a little bit of a zag here, but still with the Bills. Jamie says, do you think Elijah Moore could break out this year for Buffalo?
I really like Khalil Shakir from that offense, but he's probably the highest ADP of that receiving core. I had mentioned Josh Palmer. They had also signed Elijah Moore with that weird tender the Browns put on post NFL draft. I like Keon Coleman. I'm still not selling many of my dynasty shares as well. It's the same problem the Packers have, where there's a lot of mouths to feed in that receiving group. And I feel more comfortable saying the Bills can do it. It's just I don't know if I'm confident Elijah Moore is the answer for it. This is a complete dart. Like I would imagine in most redraft leagues, even at the end of August, provided there's no injuries, Elijah Moore is going to go undrafted. Like this is a big conversation Jake Latarski and I have in our waiver wire podcast throughout the season. Like, do you pick up Elijah Moore, winner opportunities? I don't think we have to really flag plant that this will be an Elijah Moore breakout when he's going to be effectively free for most of the offseason.
All right, so a player who I have on my list, Joe, and this is almost more of a by default type of guy because there's little reason to suggest when you look at his age, when you look at team context, that he should regress, but it's on the same lines of the likelihood that he repeats his 2024 season. Can we call Saquon Barkley a regression candidate?
Oh, I was not prepared for this one. I like it. Well, what would have been mere 24 hours ago, a very easy pushback against this has now been a little bit more boosted again.
Right.
If you've been living under a rock, the NFL has decided to retain the tush push for another season. I imagine we're going to have the same conversation come March and May of next year because we feel like we always do it. 2 votes shy from allowing that to occur. So the tush push will be available theoretically. Then Jalen Hurts has more opportunity for touchdowns again in the red zone. I was never all that worried about Saquon Barkley losing fantasy value to Jalen Hurts. It was more like, does Jalen Hurts maintain the fantasy value with this rule in place because he's so good at this one specific play?
Right.
I mean, when is the last time the number 1 overall pick in fantasy has been absolute concrete, run it back, and been actually good at doing so? Like let's just call it the Cooper flag of hype prospects for the number 1 overall pick. Like Saquon isn't the lock number 1. Again, we had this conversation last week. If I have the number 1 overall pick, I'm going to take Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, or Justin Jefferson because I want the running back coming back. But I'm not going to fault anyone for taking Barkley 1-1 right now. We're going to be doing some RotoWire drafts, redraft, and otherwise in 2 weeks. If people take Barkley number 1 overall there, we'll have zero issue with that. But you're right. Everything kind of lined up specifically from an injury perspective. I still vehemently believe Saquon Barkley is at risk to be injured. And if you are the Eagles, especially with Super Bowl aspirations once again. I think they're very clearly the best team in the NFC at minimum. You might be safer and more cautious with a Saquon Barkley injury. And if he misses 2 games or 3 games when he could have come back in after 1, that is the difference between running back 1, pick 1-1 overall, and back into the first round Achane Jeudy range. Like I think that's very clear concerns. Now you're splitting hairs because I think you still want Saquon Barkley overall, but it is it is discussing assets invested in draft order. This is a draft strategy conversation in my mind. I don't not want Saquon Barkley, but there are injury concerns that we didn't really see at all last year that could prop up this year.
You know, it's interesting when you look at the history of guys who've run for 2,000 yards, almost every single one of them ended up missing time the following year. And I don't necessarily buy into, you know, it's a year later, you know, you're finally paying the price for that 2,000 yard season. It's the general flukiness of NFL injuries. Like it's relatively rare for any running back, especially a high usage running back, to not miss any time, you know, especially in 2 consecutive seasons. So I'm not saying don't draft Saquon Barkley. He's still going to go somewhere between 2 and 5, you would think, 1 and 5 maybe in just about every league. But I'm just saying there's no precedent for somebody having that kind of season and then following it up with another season of that caliber, right? I mean, guys have been very good the next season, but when you rush for 2,000 yards, when you have one of those all-time seasons, when that narrative is building throughout the year and there's almost like pressure on the team, you know, we even saw that, you know, going into week 18, we're like, how much usage does he get? Does he push for the all-time record? Like that's kind of behind them now. Like you've gotten that all-time season out of the way. I don't think there's going to be an impetus to necessarily push for that again. So again, there are very few things that would suggest outside of the history of guys following up all-time seasons. When you look at the situational case of Saquon for why he should regress, I'm just saying, don't get your expectations up for back-to-back 2,000 yard seasons. All right, let's get to the actual list, Joe. The number 1 guy on my list, and these are not in any order. This just happens to be number 1.
Okay. All right.
Josh Jacobs.
No. How dare you?
When you look at the workload for Josh Jacobs, especially over the second half of the year, the Packers passing game essentially collapsed whenever they weren't playing one of the 10 worst teams in the NFL. They had to turn things over to Josh Jacobs. It was remarkably effective, but there's a lot of tread off of those tires. I don't think ideally he's carrying the ball 25 times every game and, you know, feels like he's the entire offense. The way Green Bay wants to operate, yeah, obviously Josh Jacobs is a focal point, but do they want him to be the focal point the way he was down the stretch last year?
Yeah, kudos to you first for avoiding the fantasy faux pas of the tread on off the tires. When there's off the tires, that's a bad scenario. That's what we're running into with Jacob. So kudos to you, Nick, for kind of getting to that point. You're right. I have some. I can understand where the rationale becomes that Josh Jacobs is going to be a regression candidate. And you could point to all the conversation we heard last year, and I pushed back specifically against about, oh, well, look at Las Vegas Raiders, Josh Jacobs. He wasn't very good. It's like, well, that's the scheme. And he didn't play all that much because he was injured and he had missed time with the contract stuff before. Like, every reason as to why Josh Jacobs, at least on Underdog, was a 5th round pick was ridiculous in my mind. Now we're talking about at least a 2-round difference, and in the case of redraft, probably a little bit higher. I like him at the back end of the 2nd round. I also don't mind Bucky Irving in that instance, or a few of those other running backs if Derrick Henry falls that range. I do not think the Packers want to move off of the run-first offense. Yes, they had Matthew Gold, number 23 overall. You still have Romeo Doubs. You still have Jaden Reed. You still have Dontavian Wicks. This is a good group of 4 receivers, and that's not even counting whatever Christian Watson, if he gives you anything at all this season. That's not counting Tucker Kraft or Luke Musgrave. Luke Musgrave coming back too. I think the 2 tight end sets will help passing as much running. Like there's a lot of reason to think that you're going to still have plenty of passing offense. I believe the Packers offense will be good. That schedule did them no favors. We didn't really do any schedule talk last week. That is one of the worst 3-place schedules I've ever seen in my life, or 3rd-place division schedules. The NFL absolutely screwed the Packers. And yes, there is the Packer hat I'm putting on. That's ridiculous, the schedule that they got. That's going to be challenging.
Well, ridiculous in what way? Because there's a system.
The week 5 bye week, okay. the times in which that they're designated away games to home games relative to the talent. There's a million things, Nick, but I'm not going to get into this. That's the Pack-A-Day podcast. That's someplace else. That's not the RotoWire football podcast. If I ever get the invites, then I can rant ad nauseum about the Packers' ridiculous schedule. They are going to run the ball and I think still protect Jordan Love. I like Jordan Love as a quarterback. I'm not convinced he's a top 12 guy by any means, but the way to make sure that you're protecting Jordan Love to be a winning quarterback in this scheme is not throwing 35 times a game. It's going to be running and giving volume to Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd.
Is there touchdown regression coming for Josh Jacobs, or at least a case to be made for it? 15 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown last year, his first ever NFL receiving touchdown, by the way, and 13 of those touchdowns came in the final 9 games.
And I would think a lot of those would be inside the 10 as well too, like within 1 to 5 yards rushing. My answer is no, because there is not a Devonta Adams. There is not a Megatron level of receiver on that team. There is no obvious, this guy needs to go ahead and have the ball thrown to him in certain situations. Devonta Adams is really good in the red zone, like I mentioned too. And Jordan Love is not one that I would say is going to be a nimble scrambler as well. So if you think the Packers are going to be a good offense, you think they're going to score lots of points, they're going to get in the red zone, but they don't have somebody to do that, then yeah, he's probably not scoring 15, but by taking double-digit touchdowns, yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'll turn it over to you. Who do you want to throw out there?
Well, because you decided to go tit for tat with this, I'll say Brian Thomas is right up there in the regression range as well. Right now, we have Brian Thomas number 5 in our custom rankings on the RotoWire site. And then you also have Travis Hunter at wide receiver 13 among our custom rankings. Either Trevor Lawrence has one of the best statistical seasons of all time, which I love Trevor Lawrence. I'm not going to knock your guy at all, Nick. Or there's one of these guys that doesn't produce to the same level. And I think you can make the argument that the Jacksonville Jaguars got better by trading up for Travis Hunter and make their offense better, and still say Brian Thomas is going to regress in terms of how much volume gets thrown his way and what kind of volume gets thrown his way. I did not imagine Brian Thomas would play as well as he did last year. I was not in on that. It wasn't like I was like, I vehemently don't want Brian Thomas at his 7th or 8th round ADP, but there was no way I was really buying it. Well, he clearly proved me wrong. But we have to understand there's a reason he was a mid to late first round pick last year. It was not that he was going to be Megatron 2.0. Nobody in the NFL saw that. Mac Jones, in a large way, helped him get there. That Christian Kirk injury, Evan Ingram injury, the offensive line issues where they really had to get the ball out quick. There are so many things that added up to Brian Thomas being the volume hog that he was, and that should be fixed both with Trevor Lawrence being healthy, with Travis Hunter being on the team, and I think Liam Cohen running an offense that doesn't want there to be a 200 target guy. Like I think that's all reasons to say Brian Thomas is definitely going to regress relative to last season.
I wouldn't say definitely. I would say I am quite a bit lower on Travis Hunter than our website projections would imply, right? So we have him, I'm looking at our default PPR rankings. We have him at wide receiver 19.
Yeah.
That's way too high. That's way too high to me. Like he in NFFC in the last month, he's going as a wide receiver 38. That to me is a lot more realistic, right? I mean, I understand the level of talent, but he's also coming in alongside a really good receiver in Brian Thomas. Like I would first rather say that Travis Hunter will have a very disappointing rookie year as a receiver than I would Brian Thomas will be a massive disappointment fantasy wise in year 2.
So I would agree that the progression is what we are projecting for Travis Hunter is too high. If you are of the belief, like all my dynasty bros, that Travis Hunter is the next sliced bread, then there needs to be some acknowledgement that Brian Thomas can't do that. I'm not personally of the opinion that Travis Hunter is that way. And this is all stemming from Matt Harmon's reception perception. I think it was in the podcast or before. And like, Matt Harmon's been fantastic and really, really good across the industry in calling these receivers and getting them early. So if you are trusting the Matt Harmon analysis, then you have to be acknowledging Brian Thomas will not be as successful as he was. I don't necessarily trust that, but there are other reasons to say, well, here's Travis Etienne more involved in the offense. The offensive line got better. You could do more. Like even Brenton Strange could be more of a factor here for that. Like I just don't think Brian Thomas is wide receiver. I think I had him at 4 in PPR leagues. Yeah. I would sooner say that's not going to occur.
I think Brian Thomas is properly valued, to be honest. I think he's that good. I think we're just overvaluing Travis Hunter. I mean, I'm looking last year. So top 20 receivers in PPR. There was only one set of teammates that finished in the top 20. And those are the obvious 2, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Like, are we getting that from Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter as a rookie? I don't think so.
Well, and the argument would have been if Chris Godwin and Mike Evans had both stayed healthy, ironically, Liam Cohen's offense would have been able to produce that same thing.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm skeptical of Travis Hunter right away. We'll see. But nonetheless, your point is taken. So, I mean, right now in NFFC, Brian Thomas is going as a wide receiver 7, average ADP of 12.8. So right on the verge of that first round. Yeah. I don't think you have to take him with the 5th overall pick, right? Are you comfortable taking him at 12? Are there other receivers you would take over him?
So it's not even so much that there's other receivers that take over him. I really like him, and Captain Spock in the chat's mentioning something that I think is important. He eighth in yards per reception, sixth in unrealized air yards. That goes back to the Mac Jones part of things. Like there's a lot of reasons to say, at least from an analytical perspective, Brian Thomas will be totally fine. Yeah. There are other factors. Again, I keep mentioning the Travis Etienne, but just overall, what happens if there is new Bucky Irving to that offense? Or what if Travis Hunter actually is, because I don't believe that. Again, I'm agreeing with you, Nick. I don't believe Travis Hunter is that. But people who are smarter than at least me, I don't want to say you, but at least me, believe Travis Hunter could be that. If that's the case, we're not talking about a Jamar Chase, T. Higgins stare. We're talking about like two Jamar Chases. I don't think the NFL's ever seen that. And if that happens, then one of the Jamar Chases is going to be less successful. I want to point out the danger of what it could be with Brian Thomas at the back end of the first round. That's really all I'm trying to draw to with our regression candidate conversation.
Yeah, I think we're basically saying opposite things. And I think you and I both agree on this, but there's the idea that Travis Hunter could be elite right away, and all of a sudden that's by default going to take away from Brian Thomas, which look, that is a dream scenario. I've been conditioned
right, as the Jags fan. Yeah,
I've been conditioned for 3 decades to know that will not be the case. But yeah, that would be fantastic. And yeah, good note there from Captain Spock, 8th in yards per route run. And again, a lot of those passes were coming from Mac Jones. I watched every minute of Jaguars football last year. There was a lot of unrealized air yards for Brian Thomas in that offense. All right, we got to move on. No more Jags talk here. We'll do this one quickly because I feel like I've kind of harped on this either on this show or on XM or whatever. Jameson Williams, Jared Goff. I'm pairing these two together. Is there regression coming for the Detroit Lions offense? And I think to me, these are the two perhaps most vulnerable pieces because I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, maybe I guess if Jared Goff regresses, then Amon-Ra St. Brown probably regresses by default. But Williams is the one to me that I think is more volatile. And of course, we're talking about losing your offensive coordinator, a lot of turnover in the coaching staff overall for the Detroit Lions. The feeling that last year was kind of their best case scenario. I know the injuries hit toward the end of the season, but a lot of those were defensive. I'm basically just asking you, Joe, should we expect a significant amount of regression to the point that it impacts fantasy values for the Detroit Lions, in a post-Ben Johnson world?
Yeah, these are two great names. Neither on my list, but I would agree at least with one, and I would at least halfway agree with Jared Goff as well too. So let's do the Goff one first. Like at the first 7 games of the season, when the Lions were effectively fully healthy, both defensively and offensively, it was David Montgomery, it was Jahmyr Gibbs. It was going to make sure you're going to win 20-10. Like that was the way. It was only towards the second half of the season when Jared Goff exploded, and I think because of that, I didn't even think about Jared Goff as a regression candidate because what we saw in the first half was so clearly what I think the Lions want to do to win football games. Like the second half of the season was out of necessity due to all the defensive injuries in particular and less to do with what the scheme thing is. I do not think that changes with Ben Johnson gone, but overall, if you want, like I thought about saying Jahmyr Gibbs as well too. Like I like Jahmyr Gibbs a lot. I really like it, but you could say if David Montgomery's back and healthy, if the way that the Lions want to run things, maybe it's possible Gibbs splits more time and isn't this can't miss, I think, top 6 overall pick. It's just worth considering. Jameson Williams for sure. If we are of the belief that the Lions want to win football games by running, ball control, making safe throws, putting Jared Goff, much of the same way I was saying with Jordan Love, putting Jared Goff in spots to be successful, throwing 60-yard touchdown bombs to Jameson Williams is not really a part of that key. And then all the creative things that Ben Johnson was doing with Jameson Williams, which I think was one of the homages to Jameson Williams and Ben Johnson were a great combo together. That's not together anymore. I don't know if that happens. Like if we're going to say what's one part of this new post-Ben Johnson era that you are most uncertain about, it's everything just pointing to the void at what Jameson Williams is going to do offensively. I think Jahmyr Gibbs has a very stable role. I know what that looks like in 2025. I know what David Montgomery does. I know what Jared Goff does. I know what Sam Laporta does. I know what St. Brown does. Is it going to be like Christian Watson 2.0? Here's a deep threat. That's what Jameson Williams does for this new team. Or is it more like, let's have him move around the field? I would think it's the latter. I don't think the coaching philosophy should be that much different. But that we even have to question it, that I'm even thinking about, makes me concerned. So yeah, absolutely, Jameson. Now the one problem is Jameson Williams is what, like a 5th or 6th round redraft guy.
Right.
the stakes are a little bit less high if the regression were to occur, and yet there is absolute boom potential in the event that he's used differently. And yeah, right. you're laughing because I'm using my SiriusXM moniker, but like that's where I go back to the Brian Thomas part of things, where because he's so high up on this, what is he supposed to do that's anything different when there's really tangible reasons as to how he could fall? Whereas, like if Jameson Williams is an 8th round pick next year, I'm not going to be all that surprised.
Yeah, I guess I look at it as simple as when I bet that Jameson Williams finishes as the wide receiver 22 or higher again this year in PPR, I don't think I would. And that was with him missing a couple of games. Yeah. And if you go down to standard leagues, he was wide receiver 13, because of the touchdowns. And it's like, do I think that's happening again? I don't think it is. So that is why he is a regression candidate for me. Okay, back to you. Who else you got on your list?
So I could use the Achane one. I was incorrect on that last year. I thought Achane was going to get injured. He didn't. I know the chat doesn't want to talk about injuries, but Achane had multiple lower body injuries entering last season, stayed healthy. The Dolphins offense was middle of the pack, and you could point to Tua Tagovailoa being injured. I would say Mike McDaniel won't make the offense middle of the pack again, or he gets fired. And I just don't think you're taking away Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle opportunities for Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane. That's not good football. That wasn't a very successful offense last season. And more importantly, they didn't win football games. But I've done this over 2 years now, so I'm not going to repeat it again. Can I interest you in a Joe Mixon regression candidate? Or are you already at the point that, well, yeah, Joe, he is going to regress? Because I almost didn't include him for that reason, because it felt like it was almost another free square.
Yeah, I have him in my just kind of others list because I assumed that he would come up on yours, and you know how I feel about Mixon. Great to start the year. I thought when the Texans were really going through it with their passing game struggling. I mean, he carried this offense essentially through week 10, week 11, and I wouldn't say the wheels fell off for him. I think they had more but I don't think it was like a physical regression.
Oh yeah.
I think it was just kind of victimized by the general malaise that was that offense, but. I think you look at Joe Mixon, and he's not that old, right? I'm trying to do mental math. He was born in 1996, so he will turn 29 in about 2 months, but also came into the league at age 20. He's a guy who's not missed a whole lot of time throughout his career. As you like to say, Joe, there is a lot of tread off of those tires. I think the cost is relatively appropriate. Nobody's drafting Joe Mixon based on what he did through the first 10 games of last year as the RB15 right now. And I think you could argue that there is somewhat of a teardrop, coming after Mixon, after Hubbard, after Kamara. That's kind of an interesting trio to me, Mixon, Hubbard, and Kamara. But no, I'm not excited to draft Joe Mixon. That's the way I would put it. Like I know I'm going to have him on some teams, but I'm not. As of right now, I'm not planning on going into any draft saying I can't wait to get Joe Mixon.
It's small potatoes. I agree with you. Much of the same way I was kind of poo-pooing the Jameson Williams part of things. I like all those running backs you mentioned. We've had the RJ Harvey and Caleb Johnson conversation there in that mix. Aaron Jones is probably around later. Yeah. I've said it, and I'll say it again. We have the RotoWire drafts in 2 weeks here. My running back 2 is going to come from that tier of those 7 names that I mentioned. Every single draft, best ball, redraft, doesn't matter if we're doing it in May, June, August. I don't care. Like that I feel very good about that. So whereas you're not excited to take Joe Mixon, I understand what you're saying. I feel really comfortable saying I can get a running back 2 in that range that's going to give me X production. I don't think there is a ceiling play for Joe Mixon relative to Alvin Kamara, even relative to certainly the RJ Harveys and Caleb Johnsons of the world. And yeah, at least for the 2 rookies, you could certainly see a floor that's far less attractive. But the last 7 weeks of the season, Joe Mixon was like running back 22 range. You were having to start him in the fantasy playoffs and being really disappointed. He finished as running back 17, but he was a touchdown away, at least from ESPN standard scoring, from being running back 12. And I think that is entirely based on that first half of the season, like you mentioned. I like that the Texans changed things. I am not selling any shares on CJ Stroud. If you talk to all my friends that play fantasy football and certainly Dynasty, CJ Stroud he's awful. Like that guy is just horrible. And I don't understand at all what we're doing with that conversation. It's very clear that the removal of the fullback, Andrew Beck in particular, from year 1 to year 2, almost 500 snaps just voided. I don't know if that's because they got Stephon Diggs or if there was Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator at the time, seeing something with CJ Stroud's game, saying we need to change this entering year 2, but it didn't work. I mean, that's why that passing attack wasn't effective. I think now going to the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan offensive scheme can only benefit CJ Stroud. We love the additions of the 2 rookie receivers they drafted. like there's a lot of reasons to say Stroud is going to be better. Stroud's going to be a top 14, top 12 quarterback. And therefore, much in the same way I was arguing for Josh Jacobs, Mixon will have plenty of touchdown positive opportunities. And there's not going to be regressions, will be positive. And that's the only scenario that would buoy, I think, what has been a pretty confidently, not a fall off like you said, but is he getting more than 1,100 yards? My answer is probably no. Like if we're seeing the DraftKings over under at 995, that's not a smash over in my mind. Like I was like, oh yeah, it's probably about where he's going to go. And whether it be Woody Marks or Damian Pierce or somebody else in that offense also getting a few more carries, it's just enough for me to say there is not as much of a ceiling as a lot of those other backs in that same range.
He's entered the Tobias Harris zone if you play fantasy basketball. Like, all right, yeah, I know what I'm getting. He's going to be in the lineup, but I know there's not really a ceiling there. There's so many more appealing plays to me, even if you drop down, another round or two. I would much rather take David Montgomery at 65 than I would
perfect example,
Joe Mixon at 45. All right, let's try to go rapid fire and hit a few more names here, Joe. One who was tough for me, and I just feel like I had to throw him on here because last year felt like such an outlier season compared to what he's done in the past, is Jonnu Smith.
Oh, yes. Great one.
Is Jonnu Smith going to see 111 targets again? Is he going to see like double the number of catches that he's had in any other season?
Well, if you're Joe Bartel, the offensive coordinator for the Dolphins, absolutely not. I'm getting Tyreek Hill and getting Jalen Waddle more involved again. It's the same concept for Achane. I think that one, someone smarter than me needs to explain what the Dolphins thought they were trying to do last year. And this is, again, not the Tua part of it. Like, just think about the times and durations where Tua was on the field healthy. Why wasn't Jalen Waddle more involved? Was Tyreek Hill really that injured that they couldn't? I understand the latter half of the season. Like, there was a lot of the hand and I think the ankle both. But there are times where I'm like, why don't we have Tyreek Hill? He was an 1,800-yard receiver like 2 years ago. What's happening with this offense? And to then have it be Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith in particular, I went to that Packer game, at Thanksgiving Packer game, and they were victimized. The Packers defense was over and over in the middle. And my dad was like, man, they're just giving this up. And I actually no, I think this is part of the plan. The Packers defense was just fine conceding it. And if the answer is, well, we didn't want to make more targets to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill down the field, and then defenses were just allowing us Jonnu Smith, that's not a successful offense. I'm just going to keep repeating it. The Dolphins offense was not successful at winning football games and winning football games against teams that matter. Either Mike McDaniel gets fired midseason or things change. So to your point, if we're saying here's tight end 7 and he's in the higher end of what we think are tight ends, really the tight end 2 range, which I would say is tight end 7 through 15, I don't want to pay a premium when I can get Tucker Kraft 3 or 4 rounds later.
Yeah, I will say the ADP is not out of control. It's like pick 90 right now at the NFFC. So I think most people are probably along the same line of thinking. It was shocking. Like, I've never seen a team pivot midseason to like straight up Jonnu Smith raid offense. Like our entire offense is just feeding this guy. I mean, he, over the second half of last season, Joe, final 8 games of the season, he had 67 targets. He had 70 targets all of the previous year against Atlanta. 67 targets is more than he's had in any other individual full season of his career. Outside.
If it wasn't for Bowers, I think people would be talking about Jonnu Smith more like, especially in Dynasty conversation, because that's what we're doing now. Buy Jonnu Smith. But there's Bowers, there's Trey McBride, there's so many other young tight ends that the idea of, well, I can buy low on Jonnu Smith isn't a concept when there's such a high at that position right now.
He also turns 30 in a few months, so it's a guy, it's a really unusual story, right? For someone to bounce around like he has to multiple teams and then have this crazy half season breakout at the end of his age 29 season. So I'm not saying he can't be productive. I just wouldn't count on 100+ targets 2 consecutive years when they have other weapons in Miami. All right. Another name I want to throw out there, Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow. Is Joe Burrow going to lead the league in pass attempts by a mile? Is he going to throw the ball like 170 more times than Lamar Jackson? Is he going to lap the field in terms of passing yards? Is he going to throw for 43 touchdowns again? I don't know if that's the plan. We know he's capable of it. He has the receiver talent to do it. Can the Bengals be a more balanced offense where Joe Burrow doesn't have to put this team on his back every single week?
And you're saying that because Joe Burrow last season, I think, was quarterback 5 with the production that he had, or right around there. At least I remember seeing
quarterback 3.
The quarterback
in terms of total fantasy points.
All right, whatever. If that's within 10 or 15 points, that's fine. Because actually, that's an important point because I have 2 quarterbacks in my list as well. My answer is yes. I actually think he has to do all that. I might be just the dumb Joe stupid brain here with wow, good quarterback throwing to good receivers and absolutely zero defense, including their first round pick who doesn't want to already suit up with them. They're going to have to score. It almost seems too simple. And I'm going to just choose to trust the idea that, yeah, it actually is, because that's what they're going to have to do. Like, I don't want to put any more thought into the idea of, nope, the Bengals are actually going to have to score 40 points a game to win. Like, that is literally what they're going to have to do. The way that they've decided to build this team, especially if they do end up moving Trey Hendrickson as well. I have no idea how that saga is going to unfold. I know that's probably been driving your co-host in SiriusXM, Jeff Erickson, mad with the dumb
He's more
things.
upset about the Bengals now than I've ever seen him.
Oh, and he should be.
I told him that
he should be. He should be. I don't remember a time in my 31 years in existence of a team that has mismanaged their assets to the degree they have. At least if you're the Cowboys, who would be also on there, they signed their guys. The Bengals almost run it to the brink about not signing. He has every right to be upset, because this is a good football team that has been You and I could absolutely be better general managers. Maybe not in the no. Maybe not in the infrastructure of the Bengals, but if this was a team handed to us, and if we were like in Omaha, Nebraska, or whatever, and got to just dictate things the way we want to, we would be able to handle things better. I absolutely believe that.
My history of managing Madden franchises, I think, would suggest.
Oh, that's why you and I are working.
I don't run the ball ever.
I'm doing the heavy lift
ever. Yeah. All right, let me throw you a couple more names, Joe, and then we could go rapid fire through.
Well, hold on. Because we're on the quarterback train. Can I just give you two more? All right. So I had Bo Nix and Baker Mayfield on this list. So Bo Nix was quarterback 8, and Baker Mayfield was, I think, quarterback 5. So you're right, with Burrow being 3. And right now they're being drafted as quarterback 7 and 8. So right in that spot. We've had this conversation before with these two quarterbacks, just overall in draft strategy. I don't have issue with people who like Baker Mayfield or Bo Nix. I don't see the tangible difference between them and Trevor Lawrence, them and Jordan Love, them and Dak Prescott. We're talking not just quarterback 7 to quarterback 12, but we're talking about a 3 or 4 round difference. This is a draft strategy conversation. In particular, Bo Nix, and this is me trusting my draft analysis last year, I think Sean Payton already squeezed a lot of water out of that towel. I don't know how Bo Nix gets dramatically better than what we saw last season. He's going to give you a safer rushing floor than Baker Mayfield. But I'm most nervous. That was really Uper way of saying. I'm most nervous about Bo Nix in particular, to just kind of repeat that altogether. And I'm already predicting what's going to happen in 2 months. I know the draft hysteria about these young quarterbacks and us desperately trying to get more young quarterbacks in the NFL is going to push Bo Nix to a level that I don't think he can achieve. So I'm worried about both those guys in terms of regression.
Okay. What is it about Nix specifically? Like, what is there a certain stat category? Like, is it passing touchdowns, passing yards? I mean, what do you have? 4 rushing touchdowns last year. I think all those, came relatively early in the season.
Yeah, I think the rushing floor is great, and that's why people are going to talk about him as like a top 7 quarterback. 430 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns is more than I was projecting. I don't know if that occurs, and I also don't think 29 passing touchdowns happens either. Like, if we're saying the touchdown to interception ratio is 29 to 12, I would think it's more on the line of 25 to 10, 25 to 15 range in a worst case scenario, like even a little bit sooner. Other than RJ Harvey, what did the Broncos really do to make that offense better? They didn't add another piece outside of Cortland Sutton, and I think Cortland Sutton already, to use the same phrase, had a lot of the water already wrung out of that towel. Like, I don't know what more you can ask Cortland Sutton to do for that offense. So what level is Bo Nix supposed to achieve higher? Like, I don't see that at all. Sean Payton does not get enough credit from me. His shtick annoys me and grates on me, but he's a good coach. That can't be the only reason Bo Nix is going to be another top 5 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, it might just come down to your evaluation of Devon Vele, Joe. I hate to say it. How good can Devon Vele be? Can he carry Bo Nix in year 2?
Some were saying, yeah.
All right, I've been saving this one because Jamie dropped this name in the chat a while back, and he was, in fact, on my list. He said, wondering if you have Terry McLaurin as a regression candidate. And I mean, this might be the wide receiver version of James Cook, Joe, because the yardage totals weren't gaudy. The target numbers were lower than they've been at any point over the last 5 years. But after putting up 4, 5, 5, 4 touchdowns over the previous 4 seasons, Terry McLaurin had 13 receiving touchdowns on, again, relatively low by his standards volume. What do you say about Terry McLaurin? Is he going to regress?
I'll talk, but I want you to look this up. I don't know where Terry McLaurin's NFFC value is right now, but that's going to be a key catalyst for my answer to this. He's had 6 seasons. pick 35. So that'd be the early third round range, right? 12,
yes.
24,
well,
36.
Well, yeah,
I guess back in the third 15. Round. Yeah. No, I'm fine. I'm fine if that's the case. The answer would be, are you taking Brock Bowers or Trey McBride around that range? Do you reach in front of a quarterback? Like, what? I always get annoyed with the draft capital thing. We're doing a dynasty conversation now, but this guy had he was a 4th round pick, so he was day 3. He sucks. Well, this guy was taken with the second to last compensatory pick in the 3rd round, so he has day 2 capital. He's good. Well, no, it was just around when the team was going to take it. Who are the receivers in that range instead? Can you read those off for me?
All right, so in the same range, we're talking we'll go within a round here after Terry McLaurin. Tyreek Hill, Marvin Harrison, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Xavier Worthy.
I like DJ Moore. Xavier Worthy's on my list in regression, which is ironic because he really didn't do anything at all in the regular season. So it was a question mark on my written down list because that's postseason regression.
Yep.
I don't mind Devontae Adams. I don't even mind Tyreek Hill necessarily, but that gives me the heebie-jeebies. But it goes to my point, like, okay, sure, Terry McLaurin's not scoring 13 touchdowns, but he's gotten 6 seasons of over 1,000 yards receiving, is the offensive weapon for the Commanders. And if a defense wants to go ahead and double cover Terry McLaurin, then Jaden Daniels is just going to run around and be a freak again. So like that was the only counter. And maybe the NFL will have different answers to the offensive scheme. I actually thought the Commanders got a lot more out of their personnel than I would have envisioned. And it felt very, not rudimentary is not the right word, but very college offense. We've seen that in the history of the NFL where college offense X gets solved in year 2 of it, and then they have to change. I think Chip Kelly is pretty notable in that regard too for the Eagles. We think about the Dolphins doing the Wildcat stuff like that. That was answered at various points. Maybe that will be what happens for Cliff Kingsbury and company. I don't know. But if Terry McLaurin is still an 8 touchdown guy and 1,100 receiving yards, if I was to say, Nick, who's going to have more receiving yards, Terry McLaurin or Tyreek Hill? You're probably answering Tyreek Hill, but you have to think about it, right?
I mean, Tyreek Hill is a tough one, right? Because Tyreek Hill could have 0 receiving yards on the season, and nothing would shock me with him.
Exactly.
But I think the McLaurin versus Harrison, McLaurin versus Adams, McLaurin versus Evans or Moore, to me, those are interesting. Like I think McLaurin versus Devontae specifically, both of those guys being a little bit older. McLaurin turns 30 this year. Like we like both quarterbacks, we like both offenses.
Yeah.
We have not mentioned, by the way, the addition of Debo, and I specifically haven't brought that up because I'm not sure to what degree that matters.
I think it's 0. It does not matter to me at all. I don't know if Debo's going to be on the field. Yeah. That matters little to me at all.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad we brought him up. At least we debated it. So who's left on your list?
Yeah, we should. This is going to be another podcast, just 20-minute conversation about Marvin Harrison. But it's very interesting. He's in that range, and I like Mike Evans. I like Devontae Adams as well too. I like Terry McLaurin. Obviously, I like DJ Moore. I want nothing to do with Marvin Harrison. But if you're going to say, Joe, who's going to have more receiving yards? There's a world in which the answer is correct on Marvin Harrison more than these other guys, which is just funny. So I mentioned Xavier Worthy. He only had 650 receiving yards on the regular season, but we all think about the last game where he gets 250 receiving yards. That doesn't count in my mind. I put a question mark, didn't allow it. I had already teased about Brian Thomas, wide receiver 4. I do think there's regression candidate there. The only other one, and this also felt unfair because the draft community is valuing him as such, but Jerry Jeudy is not going to be wide receiver 13. This season. There's just no realm. He went for a mid to late 2nd round pick in our dynasty draft from a trade that we did from a couple weeks ago. Like he's not being valued that way. Jerry Jeudy's right like around that wide receiver. Well, I'm saying he's probably in that 6th or 7th round ADP range. But I have very little confidence, whether it be Joe Flacco, whether it be Dylan Gabriel, whether it be Shedeur Sanders. Nobody in that offense is going to make me say, yes, I need to take Jerry Jeudy over the other options around him.
Not much of a rebuttal for me, man. Jerry Jeudy was probably one of like my 10 favorite college football players ever, which is saying a lot because I could go on and on about that. So I still have a soft spot for Jerry Jeudy. I never thought this breakout was coming in the way that it did last year for the Browns of all teams. I'm scared to go down that route. I really am. And you could get Chris Godwin for basically the same acquisition cost right now in the NFFC. I would rather chance it on the Chris Godwin coming back from an injury than I would fully healthy Jerry Jeudy with the Cleveland Browns.
The people that take Jerry Jeudy are literally just looking at the stats and the projections and their models and be like, yeah, I'm going to plug in the guy that's going to get 1,031 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. And that's why I'm my receiver 3. And I'm looking at the guy like, why didn't this happen at any other point that was theoretically more lucrative? you mentioned that draft. I loved CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. I remember telling friends, it's 1A or 1B. You can't go wrong. I loved Justin Jefferson out of that group the most, but I wasn't saying Justin Jefferson should be drafted ahead of either one of those. I wasn't that crazy to do it, but like that receiving class is going to go down as one of the better ones. And I'm still concerned, Jerry. It just like Nico Collins blossom after year 3 or year 4 to go to a worse situation and really get the beneficiary of the Jameis Winston saga for those 6 weeks or whatever it was last year. It makes me very, very nervous.
Yeah. Saga is somehow the right word, like a positive saga, if that's possible. I guess to close the book on Jeudy, like, is there a world in which we're just 2 down on the Browns? Because I think if somebody had told you, hey, Mac Jones is going to be the quarterback for half of the season for the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence is not going to look that good when healthy, and he's going to start a few games when he's super banged up. And, Brian Thomas is basically going to be a first-round value. Not to necessarily compare those two 1-to-1, but there is still value to be had in these bad offenses. And, like, in a roundabout way, if the Browns are down by 2 touchdowns at half every week, it's like, does that benefit Jerry Jeudy? Like, how bad does the quarterback play have to be where you just say, I don't want a part of this offense?
Yeah, longtime listeners of our show and also the stuff I do will point to be like, Joe, what is any different about the Browns offense to the Saints? And you like Chris Olave, right? I mean, that's the best example.
That's fair.
I think the Browns have more. Like, I think David Njoku is a factor. I think Cedric Tillman's a factor. I like Quinshon Judkins. I even like Jerome Ford for what he can provide by the offense. The way Kevin Stefanski wants to win football games, and the Browns are probably going to be competitive. I think their win total is at 6.5 or right around that range, if I remember checking it last. It's going to be through defense. Like, one of the lowest scoring teams in the league is going to be the Browns. So maybe there's production there and the yardage can be there and the receptions are going to be there, but it's not going to be the touchdowns. And that's the offsetter. Like, when Jerry Jeudy is getting me 12 points, that's fine as a wide receiver 3 or 4. But I think you could find guys, and this is overall what you're trying to do in fantasy, trying to find guys that are going to get more often than not 18-point games in that same range or a little bit later on. And I don't think Jerry Jeudy in that offense is going to have that opportunity.
All right. You got any other names in the holster?
No, I went through most of them again. I will go back to James Cook as the free square in this because of the 16 rushing touchdowns. I do not. I reject the premise of Josh Jacobs applying for that same logic, though. How dare you do that to me? And this was a great exercise because I found myself asking, this guy could regress. What do I like in that range? The Terry McLaurin conversation we had, the quarterback conversation that we have. I had a really hard time trying to reverse the process, and maybe this is a different podcast. Who are guys that are going to be positive? Like, who do we expect to blow out? Like, it's really hard with the ADP the way it's shaped right now for me to confidently say, this guy. And I'm always ready for the hot takes in that regard too. And I don't know if I have them quite built in just yet.
Well, that was my idea for next week's episode, Joe. So you got a long Memorial Day weekend to think about it. And it sounds like Marvin Harrison will not be on that list for you.
No.
Why is that?
I mean, that's so, boy, this is, like I told you, this is not a 20-minute conversation. Well, it's Shannon McEwen, who does a lot of best ball stuff for us. He wears a number of different hats, but this is the best ball generator conversation at the office, had told me that Marvin Harrison was going to be one of his most rostered players. And I was like, ooh, eyeball raising. And you know Shannon, Nick, but the audience doesn't. He will then proceed to make fun of you for 20 minutes for even having that sort of opinion. Correct. In a nice way of doing it, but he'll proceed. And my whole argument was to him, what did the Cardinals do this season to make you feel any better that what Marvin Harrison did last year isn't what's going to happen? And there isn't an answer to that. They didn't add a speed threat to make Marvin Harrison not play that role. Kyler Murray is still there. They did little things around the around the edges for the offensive line. Trey McBride. The offense was set up to make Trey McBride a thing last year. They didn't do anything this year to convince me. So the only idea is you're wishing upon a star that Marvin Harrison just in year 2 is going to be a better receiver. And like we've heard that before. But we've heard that before. That's the problem. Like, I need to have more reason as to buying in on Marvin Harrison just suddenly because being a better receiver, there isn't one in my mind.
I would counter that by saying the acquisition cost is low enough that I'm willing to take a shot. And we did run through some other receivers who are on the board available at that spot. You could get Devontae Adams. You could have Mike Evans. You could have DJ Moore if you want them. I just, it can't be any worse than it was last year, right? I mean, were you considerably lower on Marvin Harrison coming out than consensus? Were you skeptical of him going into last year?
Well, what can't be worse? Like his production? Because if you look at his production among rookie receivers in the course of history, that was pretty good. It just wasn't Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Jamar Chase, Justin Jackson. Like, it was pretty good. Like, that wasn't a bad year. It was because he was a late first-round pick among entering the NFL, and you and I had these conversations that was ridiculous that was even happening. That's the problem.
I think the expectations were always too high, is what I would say. And because he was taken with the 10th overall pick in some drafts and he didn't produce like Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas, it felt like a bigger disappointment season than it was.
But it wasn't with the numbers.
No, right. And that's what I'm saying. And I don't think the numbers were disastrous enough that I'm just crossing him off and saying he's going to be a bust. Like right now, he's going as wide receiver 17 in the NFFC. So it's about pick 40. Can he put together a season like DJ Moore or Jacoby Myers had last year? Because those are guys who are in that range. Like I think that's very feasible.
I think Marvin Harrison can. Marvin Harrison, the player, can. I don't clearly he wasn't as good of a receiver coming out as we thought he was going to be. Like that's a fine analysis in my mind that he wasn't as good of a receiver, but he was still a good receiver. Marvin Harris can be in this scheme with Drew Petzing and Kyler Murray. I don't think so. I don't think they changed anything. To me, everything the Cardinals did this offseason was acknowledging that they liked what happened. That's what they want their offense to be. There wasn't anything that they're going to try to improve on. Maybe Kyler Murray, second year post knee injury, is going to be better. And I don't know what was supposed to have changed. Friend of the podcast, Robert Mays, they do the Athletic Show, had this conversation last week about Marvin Harrison. It was like one of their key points is Marvin Harrison going to bounce back? And they acknowledge the fantasy value is actually part of this conversation. They're talking more from like an NFL perspective. Right. But those guys at the Athletic also agree with me. And I think Robert Mays is one of the smartest guys out there that talks about the NFL in a digestible way. There was nothing the Cardinals did that made Marvin Harrison be the target hog that Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas is. And there's nothing they did this offseason tell me that there's going to be anything different this year.
All right. We did not need a Marvin Harrison diversion. That was on me. I shouldn't have even brought it up.
Sorry. I told you it was going to happen.
Well, I'm glad it's a good tangent to end on. But yeah, we will have some progression candidates coming for you in the near future. Joe, enjoy the long holiday weekend coming up. I know you're still busy with all of our NFL offseason content. Like you said, we'll have some big drafts that we'll be doing with the RotoWire crew over these next couple of weeks. We'll get a bunch of content out of that. We'll talk about those on the pod. And before we head out, of course, just a reminder, make sure you go over to circlelasvegas.com. You can get some more information on the Ultimate Fantasy Football Draft Experience giveaway. Again, that's circlelasvegas.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you see it right there on your screen. Go check out our subscription options over at RotoWire. Put in that code YouTube15, 15% off any of our subscriptions.